What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today, we're chatting with Wes Goldberg from Locked On Heat as the Miami Heat have a heated courtside argument between Jimmy Butler and head coach Erik Spoelstra, how Jimmy Butler has responded from that moment on, and why the Heat are struggling with their late game offensive execution. But first, a quick message from our friends over at NBA Top Shot, because NBA Top Shot is the officially licensed NFT of the NBA. Connect with a community of hundreds of thousands of NBA fans as a natural progression of fantasy sports, a way to upgrade your experience as an NBA fan. This is the future of what being an NBA fan looks like. It's part like kind of trading card game a little bit. If you've ever collected trading cards, that's kind of, what NBA Top Shot feels like. It's also one part stock market, it's one part fantasy sports, it's one part loyalty reward program, because last season Top Shot actually flew out fans for game 5 of the NBA Finals. Imagine being rewarded like that for being part of an online community like this. Investors currently include Michael Jordan and Kevin Durant. And the biggest thing is, right, the big concern a lot of people always have is, well, why would you want to pay for something that you can watch on YouTube or on your timeline for free on your phone? It's not just about watching a highlight, it's about having ownership stake in what's akin to a stock market piece of the NBA's greatest moments. So you can check them out. Top Shot Moments can give you access to events that can be used in fantasy mini games on a regular basis. They can get you rewarded with trips out to the NBA Finals, special events, special occurrences like that. NBA Top Shot is the future of being an NBA fan. Own officially licensed rare NFTs of the greatest moments from NBA history. Sign up today at lockedon.nbatopshot.com. Joining us now is the host of Locked On Heat and one of the hosts of the Locked On NBA podcast, Wes Goldberg. You can follow on Twitter at WC Goldberg. Wes, the Miami Heat kind of going through a bit of a skid right now after losing to the Sixers with no James Harden, no Joel Embiid. Follow that up with a loss against the Warriors, who were without Steph, Klay, Dre. But before that loss was final, Jimmy Butler getting into it with Coach Erik Spoelstra, Udonis Haslem, a huge blow up on the Miami Heat bench. Just people having to come in and separate each other, separate the guys. What was the reaction like to this spirited debate, for lack of better terms, from the Miami players and coaches?
Well, so the response from players and coaches, at least to us in the media, was business as usual, right? They just said, you know what, when you're a group of competitive kind of guys, that's just the sort of thing that's going to spill over in the middle of a competitive game where you're getting your butt kicked, because they were, right? They were in the middle of a 13-0 run. The Warriors were in the middle of a 13-0 run when that had happened. But um, I don't know how much I buy that, honestly. I think that it was a little bit of the frustrations of having lost a couple games in a row, like you mentioned, that you shouldn't have lost, quite frankly. When you're the number one team in the East, those are games that you shouldn't be losing. And it's not just that they lost the games; it's the manner in which that they were playing, and they had not been playing up to par, and they knew that. And the genesis of that kerfuffle on the sideline, let's call it, was that Jimmy Butler was called out, because Jimmy Butler should have been doing more. Jimmy Butler is their best player. They were playing teams without their best players. And in those moments, you just expect your best player to just kind of step up and take over and just sort of win you a game. And he wasn't doing that. And Erik Spoelstra called him out on the sideline for that. And I think Jimmy Butler got a little defensive when that happened. And then that's why you saw the frustrations boil over the way that they did, because, well, there was some truth to that, right? And I think if you or me were to get called out by a significant other or a good friend by something that you and I knew that we did wrong, I think our first response would be to get a little defensive too, right? So I think it was just human nature. But it's certainly true. You just see in these 4 straight losses that they've suffered now, not only are they sliding down the standings in the Eastern Conference, but they're just not playing. This isn't just like shots not going in, Jackson. This is just not playing the way that they had been playing for, well, really most of the season so far. And it's a little confounding.
On an individual level, obviously the 4-game losing streak, not great, at that level, but just on an individual level, how does it appear that Jimmy Butler has responded to this incident?
Well, that's a good question, because once that once the argument happened on the sideline, Jimmy Butler took 2 shots in the entire game after that. So not well based on that game. But then he comes out against the Knicks a night later and drops 30 on the Knicks. That was a loss, but he played well. And then in the game after that against Brooklyn over the weekend, not a great game either, right? Another inefficient type of game. So how Jimmy Butler has responded, I would say, is a little mixed right now, but I would say it's also a little, it falls short of what you expect your best player to do.
And in these losses too, I think some of the context really does matter in how bad some of these losses have been, just because you look at the teams and the circumstances of the losses, right? Again, the Sixers without their two best players, the Warriors without their trio out there, and then against the Knicks, who aren't even in the playoff picture at this point. So how concerning should this kind of series of losses be for, the Miami Heat? Or is it maybe just a matter of fact where it's just, this is a Heat team that's kind of just maybe ready to just get into the playoffs and get to that next level and be done with the regular season?
Yeah. I think it's a little concerning in that you've lost your place in the standings, right? As you and I are talking here, they're percentage points behind Philadelphia for first place in the East. But basically, like, I know it's halftime between Philadelphia and Phoenix right now, so that could change. But they're within a half game of dropping down to fourth, right? Like, this was a period where, okay, you're getting Philly resting their best players, you're getting Golden State resting their top players, you're getting like kind of what was an advantageous schedule this last week where you should have been padding your lead for first place, not dropping and kind of getting into this mix with Milwaukee, Philadelphia, Miami now, all sort of in that same sort of mix for the first place in the Eastern Conference. So, yeah, this was a team a week ago and Boston, I should say, this was a team a week ago that seemed just like on their path to cruising maybe to number one in the Eastern Conference, and now that's a real question. And I think that for this Heat team, there was real value in having home court advantage in that number one seed, right? And now you're not sure that you're going to have that, and so you have that, and you have the fact that it appears that they're nursing some injuries, right? Jimmy Butler's been dealing with this ankle thing for a couple weeks now. Caleb Martin has been in and out of the lineup. Tyler Hero has been in and out of the lineup. PJ Tucker has been nursing a knee injury. So you wonder if it's the injuries that have been leading them to these disappointing losses. And if that's the case, well, that is a concern, right? Going into the playoffs, because you'd prefer obviously to be healthy, and they're not.
I think, right, health is obviously the number one goal for almost every team at this point in the season.
Yeah.
Most teams are dealing with some nagging injuries here and there, but even besides that point, I think there's been a bit of a concerning trend when you look at the Heat and where they're at, just as far as their offensive, like, late game execution. And when you look at their stats as far as their clutch time execution this season, they are a bottom 5 team, like along, down there with the likes of like the Detroit Pistons and the Indiana Pacers and some other teams that you wouldn't exactly expect to be in the same company as a team that is at the top of their respective conference. How concerning are those issues and just the late game execution from this team?
It is a concern, but I don't think it should be surprising either, because this isn't a team that has that bona fide scoring option, right? This isn't a team that like Brooklyn's got a ton of issues. One of the issues that they don't have is who we giving the ball to in the last 2 minutes of a tight game, right? Like, they have a Kevin Durant. Milwaukee has a Giannis. The Sixers have Joel Embiid and now James Harden. Like, they know who they're giving the ball to, but Jimmy Butler is their best player. He isn't really that kind of guy, right? He's not the kind of guy that you just give the ball to at the end of the game and can go get you a bucket. He did that in the bubble, and that's one of the reasons why Miami got as far as they did, going to the finals. But that's not necessarily his game for most of his career. And so you've got this interesting crossroads that I think Erik Spoelstra is at right now. Jimmy Butler, like I said, obviously your top player, the alpha in that locker room. In the NBA, the way this works is that you give a certain amount of respect to that player. If you want the ball at the end of the game, it's yours. Take the rock, go get us a bucket. He's probably not the best option. In fact, the best option might be a 22-year-old named Tyler Hero. And when you start thinking about the way that the locker room dynamics work, and I'm not saying that, like, the Heat, they would tell you have a really good locker room dynamic, and I do think that there's mutual respect there. It's a little different when you're talking about the final shot in a game, right? Like, Jimmy Butler's still the dude that takes technicals for this team, right? He's a fine free throw shooter. But like that just sort of speaks to who the alpha on that group is. And I wonder if they should start giving that rock to Tyler Hero at the end of the games, because he is better at just creating his own shot off the dribble and just making things happen in a way that, like, Jimmy Butler, I think, is a superior player. But when it comes to just that thing, I think Tyler Hero is better. But the Heat overall are so good in the rest of the game at ball movement, driving, cutting, screening, getting open shots. That's not necessary. And so the offense is really good in those instances for, 95% of the game. The half court has been a little bit of a drag. They need to get out in transition, and they need their defense to create offense for them. And that's going to be the same late in games too, because I just don't know that you can, at this point in the season, just kind of revamp and say, you know what, Jimmy, you're not getting the ball anymore the last 2 minutes. We're giving it to Tyler Hero now. I think they got to try to figure out how to bottle what it is that they do for the rest of the game at the end of these games too. Obviously, much easier said than done, but it does start on the defensive end. And that's really been the part, to me, watching this team on a day-to-day basis, that's been slipping recently. It's not necessarily the offense that I'm concerned about, because that's been there, right? It's the defense that has slipped, and it's the defense that has created so much offense for them.
So how do the Miami Heat get back on track from here? It's get back to their roots, get back to that, Miami Heat level of defense that they've been known for, right?
Yeah, I think part of it is what I said before, the injuries to your best defensive players. Like I said, Caleb Martin, PJ Tucker, Jimmy Butler. Like those are your best perimeter defenders, and also the guys who are creating so many turnovers for you. And when you're just a little hobbled and you're not jumping those passing lanes with the same amount of intensity and the same amount of quickness, and you're not creating turnovers in that same way, well, now you're not getting as much offense out of that either. And so I think that's part of it. Kyle Lowry was asked about this at the end of that Brooklyn Nets loss on Saturday night, and he said they're just not decisive on defense, which I thought was a really interesting word. It's not necessarily a word that I've heard very often, but what that says is that this is also a team that's working in new players like Victor Oladipo and Markieff Morris into the rotation. And maybe there's a little bit of a hesitation of how do we fit in? How are all these guys working together defensively? How is it that we're going to try to get these guys the minutes they need to ramp up to the postseason, while also doing what it is that got us to where we are, which is for the most part, #1 seed in the Eastern Conference. So I think it's just getting back to basics, focusing in on defense, hopefully getting some guys healthy so that they could play at 100% of what they could do, and just sort of and not trying to take shortcuts out of it, right? Just and it's just okay. Like it's the end of the year, we get it. You're ready for the playoffs. Maybe there's some malaise factoring in here too, but it's going to be about just focusing in on defense and knowing where your bread is buttered, and that's been where it has been for the Heat.
Can the Miami Heat get back to basics? Who should be taking the final shot for this Miami Heat team? Is it potentially going to be Tyler Hero down the line? You're going to have us covered for all of that and more over at Locked On Heat. Wes, appreciate you stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Thanks, Jackson.